630 Ched presents The Announcers. Opinion, personality, passion. The Announcers on 630 Ched, Edmonton's breaking news and conversation station.
I am Ryan Jespersen, alongside Jalen Nye, Andrew Grose. May or may not have disrupted Bob Stauffer's broadcast in the recording of this episode of The Announcers. Our apologies to the host of Oilers Now.
I don't think it would have ruined it.
No.
Some people right now going, wait a second. This isn't always live? Andrew and Jalen and Jesper weren't hanging out Saturday morning in the studio? Should we cut this part out? Or no, we keep it real here on The Announcers.
Yeah, absolutely.
We keep it real here on The Announcers, which allows me to just ask a very, very direct question. If either of you were put on the spot and asked to recite the Lord's Prayer from memory, could you do it?
Probably.
I could, yes.
You could?
Definitely.
Is that because you learned it in school, or
Yes.
did you learn it in church?
School. Learned it said it every morning in school.
Public school. Went to a public school when I was growing up, and we said the Lord's Prayer. God sang "God Save the Queen" and "O Canada."
All three of them?
All three of them.
Every morning?
Every morning.
Should you have?
Looking back, probably not. In a public school, I don't think so.
How come?
I just don't believe in a public school that's the place for it. And I believe with the influx of different religions, different beliefs, that it would cause just a little too much grief. I actually do like what the city of Edmonton did with the start of their meetings. City councils having a moment of reflection. If you're going to do it and you want to have some sort of pause for thanks or whatever it is, I like that idea.
This, of course, the council discussion was prompted across Canada after the council in Saguenay, Quebec was ordered by the Supreme Court of Canada to stop prayers before their council meetings. Edmonton's chief counsel, and I'm saying COUNSEL now, in other words, the top lawyer for the city, told councillors, Edmonton's elected municipal representatives, that they could open themselves up to lawsuits if they didn't stop their practice of prayers before every meeting. Now, we do know that their situation was a little different because they allowed members from different faith communities, they said as reflected in the population of Edmonton, to come and offer a moment of reflection. The reason why we're talking about it this week, the community of Busby, Alberta, just outside Westlock, just north of Spruce Grove, parents went to the polls, essentially. They voted this week on whether or not they wanted to keep the Lord's Prayer before classes at that public learning institution. 30 of them voted yes, 3 voted no, and 31 decided not to vote at all.
Wow.
So, of course, it will be appealed. To answer your question that you asked, Jalen, should I have said prayer in school? Of course. I come from a family that said prayer. I'm not a particularly religious person myself. Having said it every morning in school had no effect on me.
But it was a public school.
Yeah, it was a public school.
Does the Lord's Prayer belong in public school?
Yeah, if you believe in the Lord, it does. I mean, I don't understand why. And a great example. I was going to say I don't understand why we're not allowed to be offended anymore. Where if one person is offended, then everybody's got to change what they do. They voted, right? They voted, and the majority of people said we're okay with the Lord's Prayer in the school. And these days, that's not good enough. What you do is you vote, and then when you lose, you appeal. And then when you lose, you sue. We can't just say that, hey, you know what? In this town, in this school, the majority said they want this. That's not good enough.
What if parents at, say, a Catholic school voted to deny transgender students the right to attend that school?
But you're asking the question in reverse. You're suggesting let's exclude somebody. And in this case, no one's being excluded.
Except for the parents that don't want the prayer in the school.
But you know what, Ryan and Jalen, because I know neither of you agree with me on this, and as I say, I'll preface it again by saying I'm not a particularly religious person. Why is it so off-putting to a parent that a demonstration of someone's religion is so off-putting to a parent that they feel that they need to go to the board, they need to have a vote, they need to appeal it, they want the minister to step in? Can't their child just remain silent during that? Is that going to so harm their child? Is it important?
We asked the mom that issued the complaint, Jenny Blaine, why she did, and people can hear that full interview at 630ched.com. She essentially said, listen, it's a public school.
Exactly.
It's a public school funded by taxpayer dollars to offer a public education to students, and religion, quite frankly, has no role. And when we talk about, nobody's allowed to be offended anymore, the Christians in Busby, Alberta are sure offended by this. So they had a chance to vote on it, like you said. And we do live in a democratic society, but I don't think that democracy belongs in deciding human rights. And as part of the Canadian Charter, there's freedom of religion, and there's an implied and supported by the Supreme Court of Canada, freedom from religion. And that, in my estimation, is being ignored in this debate.
So the argument, though, is that religion doesn't belong in a public school.
Exactly.
So I would agree that you don't teach religion in a public school. There shouldn't be a mandated course in which they have to take religion. It's a public school. But if the majority of the students and the majority of the parents are of a religious background and would like to have the Lord's Prayer in the morning, and I get that, they could do it at home as a family before they go to school. We could keep it out of the school altogether. I guess I'm getting a little tired, this issue aside, of trying to create this world in Canada where we can't offend anyone. And you know what? There's one parent with one student doesn't like the prayer being said in class. Well, you know what? Let's get a rule. And then you know what? And I know religion is different than sports, but let's say the Oilers, and knock on wood, make it to the playoffs, and they decide, you know what? Let's play one of the Oiler games in the gym for the students, and we'll cheer on the Oilers. And a parent steps up and says, well, I don't like the violence in hockey. I don't like the exclusionary nature of hockey, that most kids will never get to be in the NHL. We should vote. Should there be hockey? Why don't we just let the schools run themselves? How about that? That's just a thought.
We do allow a lot of schools to run themselves, and parents have a choice of private schools and charter schools and home schools. But the fact of the matter is, at a public school, if you're allowing Christian prayer, you're planting a flag. What happens if the parents at Busby decide that in science class, they vote, they only want creationism taught? Is that cool?
Yeah, but you can what if this thing to death. You've got a majority of parents, and how many times will schools say, or we say, it takes a village to raise a child? So you've got a school that does something this way, and you've got parents in that area saying, we like the way you do that. And you've got children who, don't really, let's be honest, probably care one way or another. And you've got a parent with a child who says, but it matters to me. So you know what? Let's forget what the majority of the people want. Let's forget what we've done forever. Let's change everything and accommodate this child. And I just don't agree with it. I'm sorry, I just don't.
It just comes down to the fact for me that it's a public school. It's a public school. If you want to have your child recite the Lord's Prayer and all of that, then put them in a religious school of some sort, whatever it is.
Or say the Lord's Prayer in the car on the way to class.
But
and I remember.
What school is that, though, Jalen? If you've got a Catholic, say they're not Catholics, they're Protestants. They'd like to say the Lord's Prayer. So to hear the Lord's Prayer, then we should put them in a Catholic school. And by the way, I don't know what Busby has in the way of schools, but is there a Protestant school? Like instead of the public school or the Catholic school, is there hey, I'm a Christian and just want my kid to say the Lord's Prayer in the morning school? In Busby, I doubt it very much.
Why can't parents lead the Lord's Prayer around the breakfast table in the home?
Sure, they can. Why can't they do it in the school?
Because it's a public school.
It's a public school.
Like to me, it's like, and I said this to the listening audience, we gave 2.5 hours over 2 days of open line time. And I said quite directly, after 2.5 hours of considering opinions, I have yet to find one compelling, convincing argument for Christian prayer kicking off class in a public school. I went to a Christian school from preschool to grade 9. I went to a Bible college and have a diploma in theology. I went to a private university. I get it. And at that private university, they have chapel in the gymnasium every Friday at 11. And at the Christian school, they say the Lord's Prayer. We had to memorize scripture. And if I got one word wrong, I had to do wall sits and push-ups, if you want to know how hardcore it was at Glenmore Christian Academy in the 1980s. But it doesn't belong in public school, and it's not an attack on God, to reference some of the text messages we received, to suggest that learning institutions funded by public dollars intended for the general population should not champion one religious belief over another.
Given that background that you just described, did it damage you in some way? I mean, are you now as a result of that experience?
That's not an argument, though, right?
Well, it is, because why are we changing for a single
because
person's
society changes.
complaint.
Why did we give women the right to vote? Why did we allow black people to be liberated from slavery?
Those are all those are all negative things that we corrected. So you're suggesting then that prayer in school is as negative as not letting a woman vote, or as negative as not letting a black person
For some
vote.
people, they would say yes. For some people, they look at religion, Andrew, quite frankly, as evil.
Well, I know some people do, but we do, I think, still live in a Christian society. Do we?
Do
not?
we?
I think so. But certainly taking prayer out of school. And as I say, I'm not that religious myself. It just seems that whenever an argument comes up like this, it divides communities, and it seems like it's the religious community that always effectively loses, because it's much easier to make the argument that it shouldn't be in a public school than it is to make the argument that it should. For me, I just feel in this specific case, we're not talking about a whole mob of parents and went to the school with pitchforks and fire and said we don't want the prayer anymore. It was a single student and a single parent. Everybody else seems to be okay with it. It reflects the community in which the school is located. But if one person complains, we're not doing it.
Do we live in a Christian society, Jalen?
I don't necessarily believe that we live in a Christian society anymore. And I guess it depends what you're classifying a Christian society. I believe that we live in a multi-faith society, and I believe that what would happen if a Muslim family moved to Busby and they wanted to have their prayers said every morning.
I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah, well, you think the Christian parents would be?
That's not going to go over very well.
Yeah, but I don't represent the entire Christian community. I represent myself.
Well, no,
and I'm cool with it.
And you're cool with that, but I'm guessing that next thing you know, we'd have to have the prayer of everybody.
Sure, there's a Jewish student, there's a
Hindu
student.
Here we go with the what ifs again. Is there an outcry of there's a lack of Muslim prayer? There's a lack of Judaism. There's no. This is a small community with a nice group of families living there that are now in conflict with one another over one child and one mother.
What does it add to the learning experience? What does it add to what the kids are going to be teaching?
I think it implies that religion is integral to public education,
and it's not.
It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be.
But and I mean, we could go on forever and probably in circles. If the question is, are we still living in a Christian society? Do most people still believe in a higher power? And then the argument is that, listen, that's sort of waning, fewer people believe, that sort of thing. But at the same time, you're saying, well, let's take all prayer out of school, and let's not make it an important aspect of our community. That would therefore be the reason that we're living in less of a Christian society now.
I went to Henry Wisewood High School in Calgary. I can only testify to my own personal experience. It's a public high school, about 1,600 students at the time that I went there. There's no Lord's Prayer before class, but every morning, members of that school's Christian community, the believers, the high school students that attended Henry Wisewood, would meet around the flagpole. And they'd hold hands and they'd say a prayer around the flagpole, essentially blessing the day of study at Henry Wisewood High School. It was a public display, and the school welcomed it. The school supported it. There were also other student groups that had opportunities to use school facilities in their own time, in the spares that they had in their class schedule, to do whatever they liked. Muslim students would be free to pray. Agnostics would be free to keep believing that there's really nothing much out there. But the fact of the matter was, it wasn't a comprehensive experience for every student at that school. And I think that Henry Wisewood and the countless other schools that probably follow that model get it right. You're not suppressing religious expression. You're certainly not indicating that there's anything wrong with belief or with faith. I would argue quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. My family are people of faith, but I don't support prayer in school.
Earlier in this conversation, though, you were suggesting, having talked to the mother, that her daughter does not want to feel excluded.
Sure.
So therefore, the easiest way to have her not feel excluded by that argument is to mandate that nobody can say a prayer. So we'll take how many of our students in a classroom, 30 students, 29 cannot say a prayer, so that one doesn't feel excluded. Does that make sense to you?
To me, it's like you can't go with the majority vote on issues of personal rights.
Then why did they vote?
Well, that's a good question, Andrew. I mean, it's a good question. And the vote, as far as we understand it, was a result of this parent complaining to the district, the Pembina Hills School District. The school district implored the Parents' Council to go to a vote, and then the principal will take the results of that vote, 34-3 against, 31 abstaining, and then they'll work back with the board. The board's got to decide on this. Ultimately, this falls in the lap of Alberta's Education Minister, David Eggen, to do what he'd like to do here. And this all goes back to 1905. As part of the acceptance of Confederation, the entry into Canada, Alberta and Saskatchewan insisted that their school districts be allowed to retain the right to recite the Lord's Prayer if directed by specific school districts. So this is going to come down to Pembina Hills on this one, and it'll be an interesting one. The reason why I don't think you can go with majority votes on issues of personal or individual human rights, I mean, just to use a classroom example, if the majority of the students in the classroom have blue eyes, and they decide to vote that blue-eyed students don't get homework, but brown-eyed students do, is that fair to the brown-eyed students just because it's a Democratic vote?
No, but your personal appearance attributes, randomness about
religious beliefs.
Yeah, no, because that's something that's being taught in the home. That's a religious belief is far more. It goes far deeper than the color of your eyes, or the color of anything for that matter. This is something that the parents want to instill upon their children. And oftentimes, you know, we argue that, well, I'll let the child decide on his own. Like once he gets through high school, you know, I'll let him decide. Well, what does he decide based upon? He's not allowed to learn about it. He's not allowed to recite the Lord's Prayer.
He learns about it at home from his family who wants to teach it, who obviously, if they want it, that's something special. They would learn about it living every day with that family. They would learn about it going to church on Sunday. That's where they learn about it.
I mean, Christians and people of faith will talk about a God-shaped void. In other words, there's this innate, inherent curiosity, the sense of searching that people need to fill that void, and that's ultimately how they find God. I agree with you. I think that there's a faith journey. Some people go from believing nothing to lives of faith in a certain belief or value system. Others go the opposite direction. Some flip-flop between different belief systems and religions, whatever the case may be. But I think certainly when you just present one option in a public school, I just think it's a dangerous precedent. I don't know about you guys. I'm especially interested in the 31 no votes.
Yes.
Because sure, 30 said yes to the Lord's Prayer, 3 said no. But it sounds to me like in a community that is a very faith-based community, if I can make a broad generalization with, I'm sure, some obvious exceptions, I wonder if those 31 other families just didn't feel comfortable casting a ballot on this.
Probably not, because it's a small community. But you can't, I don't think, assume that they didn't cast the vote to no.
For sure.
You can't assume that. But
some of them might just not care.
That's true. Or they may just not want to have that problem. And I think, you know, in thinking this through, and as I've said all along, I'm not a particularly religious person. I do believe in a higher power, but I'm not a particularly religious person. I think the biggest problem I have with this is that we just always seem to be accommodating the minority, and you know,
well, it might be the minority in that school, but I think overall, I don't know if you could say that that's the minority.
But it's this school we're talking about. It's this school that voted. It's this school that's got conflict over this. It's, you know, I just have a problem with no matter what the topic is, that we have to, well, let's make a rule. Let's have a bylaw, and let's make sure that there's no possibility that anyone on the planet can be offended in any way whatsoever. Let's just, and you know what, it starts here, and it just, when does it end?
You know what, though, and Andrew, actually, I see 100% eye to eye on you on that perspective. I'm sick of having to walk on eggshells in certain conversations, you know, and we have big conversations on my show and on your show, and we're not afraid to tackle tough topics, and sometimes you feel like you're navigating a minefield, because if you say the wrong thing, it could be your job.
Sure.
And we get that, and I'm with you on that. But this, I don't think it's just that one family was offended. I think people are standing up and saying, I don't share this value system reflected in this prayer, and I'm sending my child to a public school, and I just don't think it belongs. Now, a bigger conversation that comes from this is whether or not Alberta should simply join 9 other provinces and say, no prayers in public schools whatsoever, regardless of district. And some people are going even further to suggest that we should talk about defunding Catholic schools that are paid with public tax dollars. I mean, this goes big. You want to go even bigger than that? A lot of people are talking about changing the lyrics to O Canada.
And we've had that conversation.
We have.
Should we?
No. I guess, here's the last thing I'll say on this, and maybe I can tie a bow on my argument. We can't all agree that we live in a Christian society. We can't even agree on that. Okay, that's fine. Can we all agree we live in a democracy?
Well, yeah. Is a democracy applicable to everything? If the majority of us here
not
vote,
if you don't like the outcome of the vote.
But if I can get enough votes here at Chorus to give us all raises, does that apply? No, it's not always a democracy.
Because this building is not a democracy. We live in a democratic society, but our boss did not give us the opportunity to vote on it. This school and this school board gave the parents the opportunity to vote. And maybe the vote didn't turn out the way some people would have liked, but it turned out. I also have a problem with giving the power to the people and saying, yeah, let's vote on it. Well, we did not see that coming.
Know what? And it should
vote.
Probably be referred to as a plebiscite.
Okay, sure.
Because they're essentially polling the audience, right? The district wants to know how the parents feel about it. And I would almost call it a straw poll because they know what the parents are going to say. They're probably looking for a reason to fall back on what they're ultimately going to decide because they know in the grand scheme outside of beautiful Busby, Alberta, it's probably going to be an unpopular decision to return the Lord's Prayer, which has been suspended since the complaint was first entered. So maybe an astute move on behalf of the district, but we're having a bigger conversation on does the Lord's Prayer belong in public school?
I'm glad the two of you are actually tackling most of this conversation because it's one of those ones, and you know it, as soon as we start talking about religion, just things blow up, and there's seemingly no right answer. There's always wrong answers. It's just one of those ones, again, walking on eggshells nonstop. I went to school. This is all I'll say. I went to school. Lord's Prayer, I remember whomever it was having to leave the class and go stand outside. And at the time, I'm like, I didn't even know why they had to go stand outside. I wasn't even that aware. I didn't really... My mother's Catholic, my father's Anglican, Catholic, Irish Catholic. They go to church, that sort of stuff. The Lord's Prayer to me, having to sit through it or stand through it in the class, did it do anything to me? Probably not. Do I look back? Did I really care? No. Do I want to be forced, or would I want my children to have to listen to it in a public school? No. When I'm at a function and they say, okay, let's have a blessing or whatever it is, and I like how they're saying it now in whatever manner that you please, whether it's a moment of reflection or prayer, I like that idea. Closing your eyes, putting your head down, or staring at the menu of what's coming up for dinner. Right? I just don't.
That's a great example right there. Actually, I hadn't even thought about that. But what about
the mayor's prayer breakfast in Edmonton?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think prayer should be in a public school. I do like the idea, though, of taking a moment of reflection, whatever way it is.
Well, I think
maybe it's just a Zen moment. You're meditating and you're looking at the clouds.
Isn't the Shaw Conference Center city finance?
Probably
subsidized. I believe it is. Or any facility of the cities, rec centers, anything that rents out rooms. Well, probably we should not allow prayer before dinner.
Come on,
no. Well, why is that a slippery slope?
Because churches can rent out a public school and hold prayer meetings. Or I don't think it's within.
But your argument was public funds should never be used. Prayer should never be used in a facility with public funding.
No,
like
I said that prayer should not be incorporated into public education. If a school presents something,
I thought I heard an argument earlier about tax dollars and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But tax dollars go into those.
People are renting those.
You don't want to talk about educational budgets versus infrastructure budgets, do you? I mean, seriously, to me, this is if a school presents something during the school day, it's endorsing the content of what it's teaching. That's what this comes down to. All I want to take from this is that after a couple of days of debating this on the show and hearing that religious folks are nothing but fools who believe in a pretend man in the sky, and atheists are nothing but people that are going to burn in hell and ignorant fools, the three of us were able to come together and have a civil, measured, reasonable conversation about this. And I hope that principle can apply outside the walls of the Announcer Studio. Thanks for joining us. You can catch Jalen and Andrew every weekday afternoon from 2 to 6. How did they get you guys to do 4 hours every day? I only do 3 from 9 to noon.
I told you that was 4.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you Monday.